discusses the mistreatment of Black Americans in the medical field. This mistreatment has affected Ryan personally, as well as millions of other Americans. She hopes you enjoy her talk. Thank you.
Okay, so I want to tell you all a story, and it's about my mom. When she was 25, she went to see a gynecologist for what she thought was going to be a routine pap smear. And when the doctor was going over the results, he told her she had fibroids. He said they were non-cancerous tumors in her uterus and they may cause trouble conceiving children. And that was it. And my mom remembers looking at the lifeless doctor staring at her coldly while she started to cry hearing the news. And the doctor also didn't tell her what these long-term effects would have on her. And my mom's not the only one to receive this type of detached treatment. Hundreds and thousands of African Americans have as well. And it's important to see how we got here. If we look back to American slavery, hundreds of slaves were the subject of their masters' medical experiments. They were usually performed in unsafe, unsterile environments, and the slaves were rarely ever given any pain relief like anesthesia. And one example of this is when John Brown wrote about it in his memoir about his slave times. He was ordered by his master to sit naked on a metal stool and wait for it to become 100 degrees. And afterwards, once it reached 100 degrees, he was ordered to get off the stool, because the master wanted to see how deep Black slaves' burn marks went into their skin and how they differed from white people. And this isn't the only example of this. Hospitals were taking part of slave experimentation too. They often ran ads for sick Negroes, and slave masters happily sent their elderly and ill slaves because it was a win-win situation. If the medical research went well, they received healthy slaves that could go back into the field, and if they did die from this research, hospitals happily paid for the burial process. And the experimentation didn't end in slave times. A more contemporary example of this is the U.S. Public Service's Tuskegee study, the untreated syphilis in the male Negro, often called the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. And this experiment ran from 1932 to 1972. And for this experiment, scientists wanted to see how, if untreated syphilis even need treatment in the first place, and how syphilis affected Black men versus white men. The experiment also recruited, the experiment recruited uneducated Black men from Tuskegee, Alabama. And because they didn't understand the dangers of the experiment, they were not given informed consent. And because of this experiment, they were injected with syphilis and never given treatment. By the end of the study in 1972, 28 people died from the disease, and 40 wives and 19 children were affected with syphilis. And even when they thought they were receiving treatment, they were actually receiving placebos, aspirin, or mineral supplements. And this isn't the only time that Black people were the subject of an experiment that was or Black people were the subject of something that was supposed to benefit humankind. Another example is Henrietta Lacks, when she had cervical cancer in the 1940s. She went to Johns Hopkins where she received free medical treatment. And during one of her visits, a doctor took some of her cancerous cells, and these cells became one of the first immortal cell lines used in many medical advances, including how to treat hemophilia, how to treat herpes, influenza, as well as developing the polio vaccine, how we use chemotherapy, in vitro fertilization. It literally goes on and on. But the problem with them taking her cells is that they took it without her knowledge. And these cells built $1 million business that her own family doesn't have any say in. And recently, they finally won a legal battle to just have a small percentage of how her cells are used in research and in the medical business today. So now, even though Black people aren't the subject of medical research or medical experiments, there's still a struggle to be seen as an equal among doctors and physicians. It's statistically proven that Black women have poorer maternal health than their wives or any other counterpart. And this is due to a couple of factors. The healthcare system as in general and also societal aspects. An example of a struggle to receive equal treatment is Elise Salazar. When she was 19 and giving birth to a child, she asked for an epidural. The anesthesiologist said she had to prove she was in enough pain first. And while this wasn't fair at all, she did finally prove enough pain. She was given epidural. Sorry guys. When she did receive the epidural, it was given by a student and not by the anesthesiologist. And when the student did give the epidural, she only set it for 40 minutes so that she would still experience pain when she gave birth. And another example of this is my mom, once again. When she was giving birth to me, she noticed that my heart rate was dropping at an extremely alarming rate. And when she told the nurses about it, they brushed her off. And if it wasn't for the nurses actually looking at my heart rate monitor and giving my mom oxygen, I probably wouldn't be here today giving you this talk. So back to my mom's fibroids. When she left that doctor's office, she felt devastated and shocked. She went on to conceive and give birth to 2 kids, but as time went on, her fibroids grew and also grew in quantity. The doctor failed to tell her that fibroids can cause increased administrational bleeding, pelvic pressure and pain, and also frequent urination, as well as if fibroids are continuing to grow, they can damage other organs. So when my mom started seeing other gynecologists, they told her she should have a hysterectomy. And they never exactly told her why she should get the hysterectomy. So she didn't go through with the treatment because she felt that they weren't explaining the treatment enough to her, and that since they were never explaining why. And it wasn't until she met her most recent gynecologist that told her she should get a hysterectomy and why, because it's the most effective method to treating fibroids. And she also did discuss other options of treating the fibroids, such as a myomectomy, which is a surgery that gets rid of just the fibroids instead of the uterus and additional reproductive organs, or going through hormonal treatment. And so one more story I want to tell is my own. Last May, I found out I had fibroadenoma, which is non-cancerous breast tumors. And when my doctor told me I had fibroadenoma, I was sorry. But he failed to tell me that they could even turn cancerous. And when my mom requested that I get a screening, he dismissed it. And it wasn't until I went to a second doctor and I granted the screening that I got it, and I found out that I didn't have cancerous cells. But it's the idea that he assumed for me what I had, and it's a problem with a lot of doctors and physicians for seeing Black people as subjects and not as people. When a Black person sits on the examination table and looks at a doctor, they should be seen as a person, not an object. And it is so frustrating to me when I see on the news Black mothers dying because they're being dismissed by doctors about symptoms that could have been easily detected in the beginning. And it makes me frustrated because when these symptoms and these conditions are ignored, it could easily cost a life, like how my life could have been cost 16 years ago. And I'm tired of seeing Black men die of heart disease and heart conditions because doctors assume that that's the norm among Black men. It's not fair and it's not okay, and doctors need to realize that we're people too, and we deserve fair treatment. Thank you. Yes.